Hello and welcome to Thyroid Revive, a 12-week Hashimoto's program for maximum remission and improved quality of life. My name is Justin Janoska, and I thank you so much for being here today. All right, I'm so excited. So today we're going to go over Module 1, which is the clinical presentation, all right? So what is Hashimoto's thyroiditis? Now, for some of you, this is already pretty obvious, but for others who don't have a better understanding about it, we're just going to describe the process of autoimmunity in general, okay? So the immune cells, they attack normal healthy cells anywhere in the body. This is not inherently bad and actually happens every day, believe it or not. So, for example, when there is tissue damage, like from exercise or an injury, the immune cells have to clean up the damage. That's where you get inflammation, right? Swelling and redness. And they need to repair the tissue. It's just part of the maintenance process so we stay healthy. Now, if the immune cells begin to attack non-injured cells randomly, then it becomes awry and autoimmune in nature. So the breakdown of the immune system's ability to make the distinction between self and non-self to certain proteins in the body is when autoimmune reactions occur. So in the case of Hashimoto's, the thyroid gland is under attack by antibodies, as you might have assumed. Why does that happen? Well, it's a bit complicated, actually, so we'll come back to that. So it's just really important to understand the facts around Hashimoto's right now. Something that your doctor may not have told you, but you probably already know that there is no cure for it. It's a lifelong condition that you have to manage, but you have the capability to treat it by reducing the symptoms till it's basically non-existent and put it into remission, which I've seen and done multiple times with clients. It can be really complicated, but there is hope. I can promise you that, okay? A common analogy we like to use in functional medicine is that the genetics hold the gun and the environment pulls the trigger. So you might have the right genes. Well, you do actually, but the gun is not firing. That's what really remission is and what you want to achieve. And when you achieve that, you have restored your quality of life again, symptom-free. Isn't that empowering? You know? So there may be flare-ups and immune responses that, surface in your life, which comes back to individuality, and that can certainly be addressed. But as much as the pharmaceutical industry and the media will give you a hint about a pharmaceutical drug, to resolve this once and for all, it's very unlikely that will ever happen. There will hardly be a chance where we can end an autoimmune disease because it's really an accumulation of various things, and that's entirely unique to you. Okay? So let's chat about the incidence of autoimmune disease in general and specifically Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, estimates that there are about 23.5 million Americans that have an autoimmune disease, but it's actually really around like 80 million. Crazy, right? And we have kind of established that there are somewhere between 80 to 100 different autoimmune diseases identified, and more to come, honestly. So Hashimoto's is one of the foremost, most prevalent diseases afflicting 14 million Americans, and especially women, where they are 7 times more likely than men to have it. And there's a reason for that, which we'll discuss later in this program. But no doubt about it, of autoimmune disease diagnoses in general, 75% are actually females. So thyroid dysfunction is as pervasive as ever now in the 21st century, especially among women, with 25 million affected, and half are really unaware that they have it. 90% of those diagnosed with hypothyroidism actually have the autoimmune disease Hashimoto's, and 25% of Hashimoto's patients have other autoimmune responses. So that might include antibodies to other areas such as the joints, other organs, intestinal cells, the brain even, right? Indicative of MS, right? So this isn't to scare you, but to bring awareness so you can explore your health even more and take action right now, okay? So postpartum thyroiditis is also seen in 1 of every 12 women and 17% of women who are new mothers. So if you're expecting, it's vital for you to screen for thyroid antibodies. But women who have a history of hypothyroidism without antibodies even have high antibodies prior to conception, or even another autoimmune disease in general, are at risk for postpartum thyroiditis and are really valid candidates for antibody testing. Okay? So let's go through a bit of biochemistry real quick, just so we can get an understanding of how thyroid hormone functions. Okay? So it really starts up top in the hypothalamus in the brain, which releases the hormone TRT, or thyrotropin releasing hormone, to stimulate the pituitary gland to secrete a hormone you're probably familiar with called TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, secretion of thyroid hormones from the thyroid gland is the subsequent response upon TSH stimulation, obviously. So those thyroid hormones would be T4 and T3. Now, 95% of the hormones that are secreted from the thyroid are actually T4, where the remainder is T3, the most active hormone responsible for, gene expression, cellular function, and metabolism, okay? So as you can see in the bottom, it increases metabolism. So without enough T3, the symptoms of hypothyroidism are definitely expressed. So, like I said before, 95% of thyroid hormone is T4, and that's really divided up into different compartments for conversion into active T3. So the liver actually acquires about 60% of it and converts that to T3. And 20% of T3 is actually converted by the gut bacteria, right? Again, why gut bacteria is so important for health. And 20% or so of T4 is converted into inactive T3, known as reverse T3. And a small amount left over is converted inside, peripheral tissues such as the liver, kidneys, brain, and by the nervous system on a per needs basis. So free T4 and free T3 are, really like passengers on a bus. So in order for them to be transported accordingly to various organs, they must be bound to a carrier protein, like shuttled by a bus. That's where total T4 and total T3 come from. So the main transporter is thyroid binding globulin, or TBG. Now, there's albumin and a few other ones that are responsible for this as well, but they're much less involved. So thyroid binding globulin is the most prominent one in the body. So once these proteins carry thyroid hormone to their desired destination, they are unbound like passengers exiting the bus and are deemed free T4 and free T3, and they enter the cell and do their duty, okay? Therefore, testing free T3 and free T4 levels is incredibly important to gather a full picture of thyroid activity, and is often ignored by endocrinologists and doctors. I mean, if you've done a thyroid panel, you would know if you saw the results if these were measured or not. Now, as part of the negative feedback loop, once thyroid hormone is in sufficient quantities, it shuts off the secretion of TSH from the pituitary gland and TRH from the hypothalamus. All right, so now we go towards the broken conventional model. All right, so here's the major issue with conventional medicine. So here's the typical scenario that you've probably gone through, right? So you walk into the physician's office and you chat about your dozen or so symptoms. He or she runs a TSH, and if you're lucky, one or two other biomarkers like, total T4. You get the results, and he or she says, quote unquote, everything is normal. Or perhaps even without running labs, you're given the hypothyroidism diagnosis and you're handed a thyroid medication and sent out the door within 15 minutes. Does that sound like a familiar story to you? So unfortunately, this is how it unfolds, and I hear it over and over and over and over again. You talk about your symptoms, but the doctors pretty much are covering their ears and don't listen to you. They will say you're healthy, but your body is screaming, no! That's where you have to take charge of your health. Sometimes they wait until all the clinical signs show up to make the diagnosis based on your inflammatory markers, symptoms, and antibody tests, right? So they use maybe one or two antibodies to confirm the diagnosis, but basically, you might agree that most doctors are quick to find a diagnosis and forget to treat you, the patient. Okay? So that's where we have this doctor-patient disconnect. Now, there's also the science-treatment disconnect, right? So we need to get one thing clear here. Doctors are trained for acute emergencies and crisis care, not chronic disease. America is number one in health technology to diagnose and second to last in quality of healthcare. This is why we are a very sick nation, and it's only getting worse. So conventional medicine is a disease reactive care model, not a preventative one, all right? So you get the label of the disease, the Hashimoto's. You get this drug, like Synthroid, but you don't know why. Most people don't know why. Or you think that this drug is what's going to serve you for the rest of your life, and there's nothing left for you to do. You just accept it and carry on, right? This is a total fallacy, and it's exactly why we have a science to treatment disconnect that most people do not understand or are totally unaware of. You might hear the doctor say, oh, it's just genetics, you can't do anything about it. But I'm here to say that while there is a component of genetics, it's not your destiny. It's not your destiny. The treatment options you have are much more comprehensive than taking medication. That's the doctor's truth from their point of view. Okay? There is a major gap between clinical practice and training in the conventional model. Doctors are taught to deliver medications to patients, but the truth is that lifestyle medicine is what's needed to manage the disease. And that includes medications, no doubt about it, but also a more extensive collaborative team approach. And this Hashimoto's program will bridge the gap and give you everything you need to put it in remission. So let's first talk about hyperthyroid symptoms. Now, this may have happened to you in the past, or maybe it's happening right now. But the symptoms of hyperthyroidism can manifest first before these hypothyroidism symptoms do, depending on what stage you are, okay? What stage you are in, rather. So this is because in the initial stages of Hashimoto's, the antibody attack damages the thyroid and causes a massive release of thyroid hormones into the blood. It just leaks out, thereby causing the associated symptoms of hyperthyroidism, right? So you might have rapid weight loss, you might have shakiness, racing heart, diarrhea, anxiety, insomnia, heart palpitations, and fatigue, and sweating. All right, so after this hyperthyroidism phase, the symptoms of hypothyroidism manifest and basically prevail for the rest of your life, unless you do something about it, of course, right? Because hormone production has been compromised. So you run into brain fog, constipation. These are all very typical, and I'm sure many of you have some of these already. Chronic fatigue, depression, thinning hair, weight gain, menstrual irregularities, or loss of a period, amenorrhea, brittle nails, thinning eyebrows, cold hands and feet, dry skin, low body temperature, muscle weakness, and GERD or reflux disease, right? So let's go over lab testing. Now, in conventional medicine practice, TSH is the most popular singular biomarker tested for to make a hypothyroidism diagnosis. But it's a major oversight to rely on exclusively TSH, as TSH can be normal while hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's is eminent. And TSH honestly does not portray a full picture of thyroid function, such as T4 to T3 conversion, free T3 being the active hormone for cellular use, right? Now, the most common lab findings for hypothyroidism show high or even normal TSH, actually, plus, low free T4 and low free T3. But this is really an archaic model, and this is why we're not getting very far. So subclinical hypothyroidism can show actually normal T4 and normal T3 with just a high TSH. Now, as mentioned previously, hyperthyroidism symptoms can be a first sign of Hashimoto's and be present before symptoms of hypothyroidism. Now, if there is an antibody attack, more thyroid hormones, like I said, will leak out and therefore decrease TSH output from the pituitary gland. So again, this is another reason why TSH alone is not a reliable marker. Even if TSH is high, the upper limit is really 2. You might see a normal range, on a lab be up to upwards of 5, but it really should be between 1 and 2. Okay, either way, a low free T3 is enough to warrant concern independent of antibody evidence, and it's one of the most important biomarkers for evaluating thyroid function. So a thorough thyroid panel should really include the following, right? So TSH, of course, but also free T4, free T3, reverse T3, anti-TPO, okay? Now, anti-TPO is thyroid peroxidase, and it's an enzyme that basically makes iodine, but it is super important for thyroid hormone production. Now, nearly every patient with a diagnosis of Hashimoto's is positive for this antibody, and it's a really valuable predictive antibody that shows up 7 to 10 years before a full-blown, autoimmune disease and even a diagnosis, which is really troubling. And it's why many people go undiagnosed for so many years, because we don't run this lab enough, right? There's also antithyroid globulin, which is another protein. It's a protein that is involved with, again, producing T4 and T3. However, there is a good handful of people, I will admit, who can test positive for it and still not really have Hashimoto's. So anti-TPO is really more indicative of the disease. All right, and then there are a few other biomarkers that are really valuable to get a full, picture of your health. So HSCRP, which is C-reactive protein, is a measure of systemic inflammation. We have vitamin D3, of course, which is really a neurohormone and helps with literally everything. All right. Every cell in the body has a receptor for 2 things: vitamin D and thyroid hormone. Okay, that's why it's super vital too. CBC, a complete blood cell count, homocysteine, which is really important for heart disease risk as well, and ferritin, which is total iron storage. All right, so moving along, we're going to chat about the 3 stages of autoimmune disease. All right, this really applies to all of them, including Hashimoto's, of course. So first one is stage 1, of course, which is the prodromal period. Now, antibodies can be and are often high for years, like I said before, loss of function or symptoms, right? This is known as silent autoimmunity. So stage 1 is silent autoimmunity. The reason is because hypothyroidism in general is very good at looking like other conditions like depression, and it can be undetected for years. So you have high antibodies, but really no symptoms. It's, again, silent. Stage 2, this is where a lot of people start to catch on that something is wrong. But many ignore it and fight through it and attribute it to something else in their life, actually. So some are proactive enough to explore this and test for thyroid. So this is where thyroid antibodies are still high, but symptoms start to surface, and there's a little bit of damage going on, but not so much a major loss of function. And then, of course, full-blown disease is, stage 3, where you've high antibodies, significant symptoms, and severe destruction and loss of function. This is where a lot of people end up and get the diagnosis where, it's already very, very late, too late almost. But the truth is that autoimmune disease is the end stage of really a mechanism that's been going on for years, right? Like I said, these antibodies have shown up in you for 7 to 10 years back in stage 1. So symptoms were absent for a very long time, and you're suffering inside without knowing it. Then when you have symptoms, you get the diagnosis finally, and the drugs, the medications will help relieve the symptoms, but that still doesn't address the why you have it. So in this program, you will discover the why and what you can do about it. Okay? All right, moving on to medications, glandulars, and thyroid support formulas. All right, so synthetic medications are pretty much the go-to, and the first thing, endocrinologists will dish out to patients. So we have, levothyroxine or Synthroid, which is super, super common. And, about 15% of patients really still have symptoms despite having a normal TSH and still have low T3 levels, actually. Then there's Cytomel, which is just T3, and then there's some, T4, T3 combos, which aren't used as much. Okay. Now, getting into glandulars, desiccated thyroid, these are natural thyroid meds, right? So we have Armour, concentrated pig glandular. We have WP thyroid, Nature-Throid, and, NP thyroid. Okay. Armour is the most common, really, if we're going to go the natural route. And we have thyroid support formulas. Now, you've seen these as they are totally popularized. They contain thyroid precursors that are needed for thyroid, hormones and conversions. So you have like iodine, of course, selenium, tyrosine, zinc, and vitamin A, which are all helpful. But listen, you can achieve this through diet. In the case of Hashimoto's, the medications are doing most of the work. These supplements ensure you don't have deficiencies, but you won't magically get better with this. In fact, most people don't. So it's likely better to avoid probably purchasing these. You can get it through diet. So which medication should you choose, synthetic or natural? Which is best? I know it's rather confusing, but doctors will give the impression that drugs are the only thing that can treat disease, right? Medications manage symptoms, but disease still progresses. You still have autoimmunity, to be honest. Drugs will mask the symptoms, and often doctors find a new problem based off of the side effects of those medications and treat those symptoms with another drug, which is known as polypharmacy. So you end up taking multiple drugs per day. Does that sound familiar to you? And commonly, there's a honeymoon phase after you go on a replacement where you may see a change in symptoms, but it doesn't last. And for many, being on replacement doesn't even remove the symptoms, but the labs still look normal. That's a common issue and why people still feel stuck. All right, so in Hashimoto's, thyroid medications are generally needed for life, despite what is done to mitigate the inflammation, because there's just some degree of decreased thyroid output and presenting symptoms. So even if you jump off the meds, you'll know right away if you can handle it. Now, everyone's very different, though, of course. Most people rely on meds. But listen, if you accept that you need medications, you think that is all you need because that's what you've been told by your endocrinologist. It will foster your healing, but it should instead prompt you to dig deeper to get to the next level of healing. Hence why you should really consider this program. So if you continue to take meds to suppress your symptoms and curtail progression and continue to live the lifestyle you're living, you will not get healthy. Thyroid medications address thyroid levels, but they don't address inflammatory autoimmune responses. All right? So oftentimes you hear people say that they don't feel much better on, say, Synthroid, yet their doctors don't change their medication. Conversely, people who jump straight into, say, Armour don't feel much better either. So it really comes back to individualism because, again, everybody is uniquely different and has different tolerances. So if you've taken Synthroid for years and haven't felt better, it's because you're either still harboring a lot of autoimmune reactivity, right, and not converting to T3. Well, that's because, antibodies are attacking the enzymes, all right? Conversion is still, basically a problem, which Synthroid doesn't correct for. And if you happen to take natural thyroid, like Armour, you may not feel good either. And it could be just due to a massive attack on your T4 and T3 itself. So at the end of the day, it's really not a medication problem because medications address thyroid levels but don't address the inflammatory autoimmune response. All right, does that make sense? Awesome. So that's it. That concludes Module 1. Thank you so much. If you join the program, you can expect a super comprehensive and detailed 11 more modules with actionable steps to kickstart your remission process. Okay, so that would include, Module 2, which is about mindset, reframe, and expectations. Module 3 is on trauma, hidden sources of stress, past and present. Module 4 is about family support and community support, how to communicate the disease to other people and relatives. Module 5 is on stress in the nervous system, more specific to thyroid. Module 6 is on personal care. Module 7 is on gut health. Gut health part 1. Then there's module 8, which is gut health part 2. It's a massive topic right there. Module 9 is environmental toxins. Okay, and module 10 is infections. Module 11 is supplements, and module 12 is continued support, maintenance, and lab testing. So you really keep this into remission and never have to worry about going to see the doctor again. All right. Now, if you join the program, there will be weekly Zoom calls, which are optional to join, but they're weekly support calls for any questions and troubleshooting and support all the time, for anything you really need. And then, of course, there is the Facebook support group, so a community of like-minded individuals who are all going through the same thing, and you can all bounce ideas off each other, chat about your victories, talk about where you're having, where you're struggling, and it's just a really positive group. So you get to where you want to be as quickly as possible. All right. So that's it. Thank you so much for joining this and investing your time and energy to learn about the program. All right. I hope to see you soon. Take care now.